Alright, so we're going to start off just with making a normal project quickly. So let's go new project. We're going to make an AND project, a Java application, and let's just call it first lesson revision. Alright, I'm going to save it in the grade 11 GitHub, just so you know where it is. We'll make a new folder here, just call it revision. Right, so we are saving this project called first lesson revision in folder called revision. I think I'll just take first lesson, just do that. Okay, so we can create the main class here, but for this, in this case, I'm not going to do that. So we make everything from scratch, and we're just going to put it into the library there. Right, so we create the project, and we'll see now it's got first lesson source packages. We're going to open that up. Got a default package, but let's make a new one. Make a Java package, and we're just going to call this one main package, just for this case. All right, then inside there, we're going to put a new Java class. And this is going to be called testing args, just so we can see what we do with .args. Alright, so you can see here we've got our package, so we always have to have the package just to tell the compiler where everything is. We then have testing args, so this is our class. And remember, we always need this class because everything inside Java is found inside classes. Then we need to make a main. So we first use our access modifier called public. This public tells us that it's going to be available to any other class inside this package. And if it's outside the package, in other words, if we made another package over here, we would then have to call it at the top with the import, but that's not the point now. Then we're going to make our static. Now the static, that is just there to tell us that it is always available for us to use. If we make it non-static, that means we need to call an object, but because it's static, it belongs to this class and it's always there. Then we're going to make it a void. A void just means that we don't have a return. We'll get through to different return types a bit later. Then every single Java application needs a main. The main is basically a keyword that the compiler uses to try and find it, or to try and run it. And then we have our string, and this is a string array, and then we put our args there. Okay. Now, the thing about this, we don't really use it within this type of application, but if we went to command line interfaces, it would be a little bit more useful. But for now, what we can do is we can actually get the value from args. So we can do string, let's just call this input, is equal to args, and we can say just the 0th position. Right, now if we run this, should compile. Oh, that's from my previous thing. Forgot to set the main again. Okay, remember we always need to go set main project, and we're going to set it to the first lesson here. Alright, so if we actually wanted to put a value in here, obviously at this point we can't input anything, and so what we would do is we go to run, set project configuration, customize. You can see here it's called arguments, so we can put here something like say the first lesson arg. Okay, so we got that there. We're not doing anything with it yet, but basically this is just when it compiles, it's going to put that first lesson args into there. And so if we print it, we can print input, and what we should see then, cool, set it as the main, it's then going to print out whatever we put inside that argument there. Right, so that is something just so you know about it, but it's not a massively important thing. We'll get to the rest of the lesson now. Okay, so that was just what the args does. Guess we can get rid of that. Right, then we've got our primitive types. Right, so primitive types are just data storage variables that we can store data into. The main point of primitives is they're nice and quick, but they do have specific limitations. They can only have certain numbers depending on how big, or depending on which of the parameters you use. Alright, so the most common one, and the one that we're going to use probably, or is a toss-up between the two, either int or string, but the one to store numbers is int. So we use our keyword. From there, we then need to give it a identifier. Now, identifiers can be anything. Literally anything. We can type in whatever we want here, and that can be used as the identifier. The only rules is that we can't start with numbers. It's not happy with that. Other than that, there is not many rules other than the fact that we generally use camel case. So it would be, say, the initial number, and then we've got our camel case. Other version of this is to put underscore in the number like that, but with Java, the style guide prefers using num. Now, we also don't have to assign a variable for it initially. We can just make this variable called initNum, and that means we are storing a piece of memory, or we're setting up a piece of memory that's going to take a number that'll be a maximum of an int. We can then, so we've initialized it, we can then assign a value, and so we could say then 2. Right, now as you can see here, it's not, or at this point we're not reading anything, so we can just use that. We've then got, and then also integers can go up to 2 billion. That's our limit. You should be aware of that by now. We then get our string. And so string, once again, our identifier can be anything. So let's call it a word, for instance. Okay. Once again, we don't need to actually assign anything to it. We can just do this, where we've got our value there. And then we assign a value to it. So we then have a word is equal to right, so those are basically the two most important primitive types. The other primitive types that we get, things like char. So these store 256 bit words, letters. When we type that, we need to put single quotations. So anything like B could be a char. Once again, we could do that whole idea of initialize it and then assign a variable, but it's not necessary. Right, some other types, we also get the double. So double, these are used for bigger numbers and scientific notation. So once again, you just type in the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we can either put a .0 just to say that this is a double value. We also have the idea of putting a D at the end. So that would be if we did D. That is basically the same thing as putting the .0 there. It just says, okay, this is a double. The other option we have, or when we're using scientific notation, is to then use the E. So if we wanted to put in 1.34, E stands for times 10 to the, so that's times 10 to the 54. All right, and so that's just the basic primitive types. There are a few more. We've also got Boolean. So Boolean is just going to be a true or false value. So we can just assign them true or false. Right, so if we want to now print out all of these values, we can then do system.out.print, and we'll print out init num. Let's print out a word, and then we can also print out all of the a letter. And lastly, we'll print out this. Right, now, when we put it into here, it automatically turns it into a string. We can force that later, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So let's see what this prints. Right, so we get our 2, I'm a word, B, and so on, just prints out all the values. All right, so those are primitive types, and we'll look at the rest of it just now.